First of all, I would like to express my thanks for being invited here to speak to you. Can you hear me, or is it?
Yes, this is here. Very good.
But also, I want to express, as a number of people have done yesterday and today, my real admiration for the way in which the World Uyghur Congress, all the affiliated organizations, all the Uyghurs, and the leadership has been able to really build the movement over so many years. I mean, I've known Erkinci for more than half my life, I think. And we have worked together. But at a time when there was not sufficient attention being given back by the international community for what is happening to you. Sadly, it has had to happen in part due to the extreme measures that the PRC has taken under Xi Jinping to bring to light. It is the Chinese that in part have brought to light the plight of the Uyghur people and the other peoples of Eastern Turkestan. But I really admire the way that you have in these last 20 years managed to draw serious international attention to what is going on and preparing yourself for the next phase of your struggle. I have some PowerPoint. I just want to make sure that it is available. It is very few illustrations, but on a couple of key points I'd like to illustrate, because sometimes visual is more effective than only spoken language. Do you have it?
You have it, that's right.
Sorry for this little delay. I sent it last night, but it seems yes.
Thanks, sir.
So, as you've just heard from the introduction, we have been working, and that is my colleague Walt and myself, we have been working for the past few years doing research, thank you, doing research on who ruled Eastern Turkestan over the last 2,000 years and how, but also who ruled what we call the Han homeland, or the place where the Chinese, as we call them today, but actually where the Han lived and have lived for thousands of years. Some people call that China proper, other people call it the Central Plains. We've chosen to call it the Han homeland to avoid misunderstandings on what it is that we really are talking about. In other words, when we talk about the Han homeland, it does not imply a political entity, a state, but simply the territory. When we talk about that region, we use Han homeland. When we talk about a political entity, a Han state, we will use the name of that state, like the Han dynasty, although it coincides with the word Han, or the Tang dynasty, or the Ming Great State, etc. Because that is how they were known at the time. They were not known as China. We do this also, in other words, we only use the word China when we talk about the Republic of China from 1912, or the People's Republic of China. Because it was in 1912 that China was created, the state that we know as China. And we also do it so that we don't confuse the present state, China, with historical Han states or empires that existed in the past, because they're not the same. They're distinct, they're different in terms of territory, they're different in terms of governance, they're different in many different ways that are quite essential to an analysis of the status of Eastern Turkestan. Also, we don't use China and Chinese when we talk about the historical period before 1912, because it may give the impression that there has been a continuity between earlier Han states and the PRC, which again is not true. So, in fact, one of the reasons why we kind of use this term Han homeland is because there's so many periods in history where there is no Han state. And so how do you then describe that region? You have to use some territorial expression, some territorial description. And really, and I'll come back to this later, the use of China and Chinese, the way that many of us have been using it indiscriminately to describe so many different things that mean so many different things to people, has led to a confusion that makes it very difficult for us to understand the historical analysis, in particular to places like East Turkestan, Tibet, Southern Mongolia, Taiwan, other places that are not part of what we call the Han homeland. Also, just before I continue, I talk about Eastern Turkestan rather than East Turkestan when I'm talking about the territory, not the political entity East Turkestan, or as the Chinese call it, Xinjiang. Again, just so that I'm clear that I'm talking either about the region where for most of the history there wasn't one polity, but many different polities, many different khanats or states within that territory of Eastern Turkestan. So I make that distinction, and I sometimes talk also about East Turkestani people, meaning the Uyghurs and other peoples, Kazakhs and other people in Eastern Turkestan. Just for clarity, so that you understand how I use these terms. And today our research has been very careful, and we haven't finished it yet. So today I'm only going to want to speak about those areas, those conclusions that we've reached that I feel confident about, because Mick and I have researched them in great detail, some of it already peer-reviewed, some of it's yet to be peer-reviewed. So coming back to my point. The picture that emerges if we look at how Eastern Turkestan was ruled and by who, and how the Han homeland was ruled and by who and how, historically, allows us to state with confidence, and that's really the finding that I want to present to you today, or at least a portion of it, is that East Turkestan today is under Chinese colonial rule. But specifically, the same kind of colonial rule that France exercised in Algeria or in Vietnam, that the Netherlands, my country, exercised in Indonesia, that the US exercised in the Philippines. In other words, the colonialism of the type that existed and was widespread in the early 20th century, the late 19th and early 20th century. In other words, I'm not talking about neocolonialism. I'm not talking about internal colonialism, which are terms that are very often used nowadays as 21st century forms of colonialism. I'm talking actually about a kind of classical colonialism, in which you can talk about East Turkestan as a colony of China. I'm talking, in other words, about the colonialism that was firmly outlawed after the Second World War, and even more absolutely made illegal from the 1960s and 1970s by measures taken by the United Nations. And so the Uyghurs and other peoples of Eastern Turkestan today are the victims of that type of colonialism. The Chinese colonialism they've been subjected to, technically, since 1912. The two findings that lead to this conclusion are the first, that Chinese rule in Eastern Turkestan has been colonial in nature, the way in which East Turkestan is ruled, from the moment that Eastern Turkestan came under the nominal sovereignty of the Republic of China in 1912. And secondly, that the rule was foreign from the outset, and that it remains foreign today. And it is the second point that I want to talk about today. In other words, that the rule of Eastern Turkestan today, but actually since 1912, is foreign Chinese rule. But I also will say some things about why this is not generally known or recognized internationally. And I know that many of you, when you're doing advocacy, you find a lot of obstacles, a lot of assumptions that you have to overcome before you can really make people understand what is happening in Eastern Turkestan and why you're in the situation you're in today, and why it is that you claim that you want a changed political situation. So one of the reasons, and I will come back to some others, that is not generally known is that the PRC's rule in Eastern Turkestan is foreign because that is not one of the reasons why it's not generally understood that it's foreign is, of course, because Beijing, the PRC, loudly proclaims that it is not. It loudly proclaims that Eastern Turkestan is simply an integral part of China and has been for the last 2,000 years, since the Han Dynasty, to be specific. you know that this is not the case. But most people outside of this room have some assumption that there is some truth to this. That somehow Eastern Turkestan was part of China. When exactly or how, they may disagree on, or they may not know, but there is a sentiment that somehow this is true and that your position is somewhat extreme. So I address the fact that this is not true, that Eastern Turkestan was not a part of China since 2,000 years, since the Han Dynasty, at an earlier conference that I was kindly invited to. But I will, without lingering on that point, I just want to show you an overview of who, apart from obviously local Eastern Turkestani rulers, ruled or exercised controls over parts of Eastern Turkestan and sometimes over all of Eastern Turkestan until 1912, just to refresh your memory. Now, where is it that I push? I suppose, it's not. It's, okay, this one. So what this actually shows is that over the centuries, on the left is the timeline, that over the centuries, and on the left is the timeline, up there is the northern part of Eastern Turkestan, and on the right is the southern part of Eastern Turkestan. Over the centuries, multiple different foreign powers controlled some or all of Eastern Turkestan. Some directly, some indirectly, some with strong rule, some with weak rule. Their origin was mostly, if you see their names, mostly Inner Asian. Inner Asian powers, whether they were Turkic, Mongol, many different kinds of Khanats, Tibetan at one point, Han, Manchu, but hardly Han. None of these empires that ruled over parts of Eastern Turkestan had staying power in the long term. I mean, some ruled for a long time and some short, but they all came and went. And this is not unique to Eastern Turkestan. This is the history of most nations in the world. Now, let's look at just the Han states that exercised authority, a degree of controlling authority over Eastern Turkestan over the last 2,000 years. They are represented by those two yellow portions there. So this timeline shows, firstly, that before 1912, which is this point here, two different Han states controlled part or all of the region for about a total of 270 years out of 2,000. And obviously, very long time ago. More than 1,000 years ago. Both of those empires, the Han and the Tang, came and went, just like all the other powers you've seen before. So if we take the information from just these two very simple and not precise charts, because it's difficult to make it very precise when you do it visually, if we take this information from these two charts, it's clear that the notion that Eastern Turkestan should have been part of a Han state, which the PRC calls China or Chinese, or part of so-called Chinese territory since ancient times, is simply absurd. But not only is it false, it is also misleading, because to claim that Eastern Turkestan has been a part of China or Chinese territory since ancient times actually suggests the continuous existence of China or of a Han state since ancient times. The two are, it's not possible to say it's been part of China since ancient times, and at the same time not insist that China existed since ancient times. But this is not the case, because despite what most of our history books say, and most of what the media says, China has not existed since ancient times. And that's very significant. Now, I'm not denying the existence of the Han homeland since ancient times, in other words, this territory and the people that live there. I'm not denying that there has been Han culture since ancient times. There has been, and of course it's changed over that period, but there has been a rich Han culture. What I am saying is that there was no continuous Han political entity or Han state since ancient times, and certainly not a state China in this long period of time. Because China came into existence with the foundation of the Republic of China. It was imagined, it was constructed in 1911, 1912. Before that, it did not exist. There had been Han states before, but they were not called China, they did not resemble today's China, and they were completely different states, and they were known by different names. So Beijing's projection of today's China into history, in fact today's China with the PRC's claimed borders into history, as if it had always existed, is a false representation of history. Now, some other countries also do that. They create a national history that is projected way back. But what is harmful is when you do that in order to derive rights to other people's territory by using this kind of false historical narrative, invented, imagined historical narrative. It's one thing to imagine it, to give pride to your people, etc. It's a completely different thing to imagine it and to use it to take other people's territory. Now, most importantly, when Sun Yat-sen founded the Republic of China in 1912, there had not been a Han state for over 250 years. Not since the Ming Dynasty had been defeated, conquered, and extinguished by the Manchu Qing great state. So if you look at this little figure, the yellow is again when there was a Han state ruling the Han homeland. I'm not talking about ruling East Turkestan, but the Han homeland. The blue is when it was a non-Han state, an inner Asian state. In the first case, part of the Han homeland was ruled by the Jurchen, an inner Asian people. Later, they called themselves the Manchus. And the southern part was ruled by Han. Then you get, of course, the conquest by the Mongol Empire. And then the Ming Dynasty, a Chinese dynasty, a Han dynasty, and then that is conquered, the Han homeland is conquered by the Manchu, an inner Asian people, an inner Asian empire, and this is not an ethnic issue that I'm talking about. It's not because they're Manchu and not Han. It is because it was an inner Asian empire that conquered the Han homeland, that conquered the Ming. So it is a completely different structure of rule. Its origin is in Asia, and it moves and conquers the Han homeland. Now, just the fact that the Han homeland was such an important part of the Manchu Empire does not make the Manchu Empire Han or Chinese. It is like saying, you know how the British used to call India the crown, the jewel in the crown of the British Empire, because it was the most important part of the empire, economically, politically, and otherwise, and territorially. The Han homeland was the crown in the jewel of the Manchu Empire. But India, the fact that India was the crown in the jewel of the British Empire didn't make the British Empire Indian. In the same way, this did not make the Manchu Empire Han or Chinese. So again, this is just to point out that there is no, the notion that there's a continuous Han state, which again in Chinese language today is the Chinese state, existing prior to 1912 is simply not true. There's one other misconception that needs to be addressed, and that is the notion that the Republic of China was simply when it was created, it simply constituted a regime change in quote-unquote China. In other words, that it was a continuation of the Qing Empire in a republican form. I think that is a general assumption that many people have. And that comes from the notion that there's a continuous existence of China, and there's simply regime changes. One emperor from another, and the PRC today says one ethnic group rules and then another ethnic group rules. This is a fabricated way of rewriting history, but in effect, the creation of the Republic of China was the creation of a new state. And to make this clear, let me just bring it back to 1911, when, as you know, there were rebellions, revolts in many provinces in the Qing Empire, but specifically in the Han provinces, that were rallying around the cry to expel the Manchu, the foreign barbarian rulers, and restore the Han. By October of 1911, their leaders set up a revolutionary government, and almost all Han provinces declared their independence from the Qing Great State, which was the official name for the Qing Empire, the Qing Great State. A month later, Mongolia declared its independence, and this was very significant not only because Mongolia covered a huge territory, a huge part of the Qing Empire, but also because the Mongols played a very important role in the expansion of the Qing, in its very establishment, but also in the expansion of the Qing Empire and also of its rule. They had a very important role in ruling the empire, particularly the military aspect of it. The Dalai Lama of Tibet had already ended his relationship with the Manchu emperor 2 years earlier, and by 1911 the Tibetans were throwing out, expelling all Qing officials that were still there and the Qing armies that were still in Tibet. So another very sizable chunk of the Qing Empire, if you like, was exiting. On the 1st of January 1912, the Han provinces that had declared their independence from the Qing Empire, which was almost all Han provinces with the exception of one, joined forces and proclaimed the establishment of the Republic of China, bringing the breakup of the empire, bringing the breakup of the great Qing state to a point of no return. The emperor was forced to abdicate, and the great Qing state ceased to exist. It was extinguished. What happened in what I just described when the Qing Empire came to an end was the result of a process that we call dismemberment, breakup. And the Republic of China was just one of several states that emerged from that dismemberment, from that breakup. So the Republic of China didn't simply take over and continue to rule the territory of the Qing Great State, or perhaps under a different name. It was an independent state that emerged from that empire. And this is, I think, the part that is the most difficult for many people to grasp, because when they look at a map of the PRC today, it looks a little bit like the Qing Empire. Although, of course, there's this huge part of the Mongolian Empire, and there's Taiwan, which is not today recognized internationally as part of it. But what we fail to recognize is that that large map that we see today as the PRC was created by the PRC by its own military expansion, the way that the ambassador of Taiwan described today. In other words, that was not the Republic of China. Another way to understand this and to make this perhaps clear to people who don't quite follow your reasoning is to make them think for a moment of the breakup of the Soviet Union. We commonly refer to it as the breakup of the Soviet Union. We talk, the Soviet Union ceased to exist because it was dismembered. Distinct parts of the Soviet Union each declared their independence from the Soviet Union. And what many people forget is that the Soviet Union ultimately broke up because the Russian Federation, Russia, declared independence from the Soviet Union, the same way as the Han provinces declared independence from the Great Qing state. So obviously, they were not a continuation of the previous state, just as Russia, the Russian Federation, is not a continuation of the Soviet Union any more than Kazakhstan is, or than Georgia is, or than the Baltic states are. Now, did the founders of the Republic of China want to make all of the Qing territory theirs? Yes, they did. It was certainly their goal and intention, and they very audaciously declared in their founding documents that all of these territories were actually the Republic of China. But did they actually achieve that they were part of the Republic of China? No. Why do I say audaciously? Because they did so when the Republic of China, when it was created, had no presence, no control over non-Han inhabited territories like Mongolia, Tibet, and Eastern Turkestan. Those were, in other words, that claim and the maps that were shown of the Republic of China were at that time purely aspirational. And in fact, both Mongolia and Tibet, as many of you knew, rejected the overtures of the President of the Republic of China to join the Republic. You don't ask someone to join a republic if they're already part of it. They asked them to join, both very firmly and repeatedly rejected this request. So, and no control was established, not in 1912, not any time after that during the existence of the Republic of China. So those claims remained aspirational. Now, in Eastern Turkestan, the situation was a little different from Mongolia and from Tibet, because it was not the people of East Turkestan, the East Turkestani, but a former Qing official, a Han general by the name of Yang Zhenzin, who successfully grabbed power in Eastern Turkestan with the help of a sizable army. And a few months later, he pledged allegiance to the Republic of China. And the Republic of China then appointed him governor of Xinjiang. For the next 30 years, Han military dictators, one after the other, who overthrew each other, in other words, they weren't simply appointed by the central government, they took power, and then the central government accepted them simply because that was the only way they could claim some authority or some nominal authority over Eastern Turkestan. These Han military dictators ruled Xinjiang with an iron fist, repressed resistance, and ruled Eastern Turkestan independently of the Republic of China, or independently of the government of the Republic of China. In fact, if the rulers of Eastern Turkestan were close to anyone, it was to the Soviet Union at that time. So much so that there's a whole period during that time that Eastern Turkestan could best be described as a satellite of the Soviet Union, not of China. In the same time, in the same period, in between 1912 to 1949, East Turkestani independence movement twice declared an independent East Turkestan Republic. The first, based in Kashgar, was declared for the whole of Eastern Turkestan, but controlled only a portion of it, and it was crushed very quickly. It was established in 1933 and was crushed early on. The Second Republic was established in 1944, as you all know very well. Its government also declared the Republic to cover all of Eastern Turkestan. And for the next 5 years, it ruled and controlled northern Eastern Turkestan from Hulya until the armies of the People's Republic of China, or PLA, seized the territory and also the rest of Eastern Turkestan in 1949-1950. All this history you know. Now, it makes it, what I just described makes it difficult to describe, to label the status of Eastern Turkestan during those years. And the best we can really do for most of that period is to say that the Republic of China had nominal sovereignty over that territory, but that East Turkestan was ruled independently of it. Now, what we also should realize is that many other territories that had been part of the Qing Empire were not being ruled by the ROC. And I'm not just talking about Tibet and Mongolia now, in Eastern Turkestan, but also about Manchuria, which became an independent country, of course a puppet state of Japan, but nevertheless not under control of the ROC. Taiwan was, as we already heard, a colony of Japan and was therefore already since 1895 not under control, and certainly since 1912 not under control of the ROC of China. And so we're actually talking about the Republic of China only consisting of the Han homeland, essentially, with a little bit here and a little bit there in addition. And even within the Han homeland, the government had little control over many parts of the Han homeland. So it is strange and preposterous, really, for much of the rest of the world to have recognized the Republic of China in its aspiration, at least less than half of it. But one of the reasons why this was the case, why this was done by many in the international community, was because this was a very different era compared to when the Soviet Union broke up, for example. This was at the height of the colonial period. This is when foreign powers were gathering territory, where they were taking someone else's territory by force was not only not forbidden, but it was to some extent permissible. And so the point that I'm making is that the period was different, the way in which it was looked at was different, and so the big powers were essentially, most powers that were involved in this part of Asia were simply looking after their own interests, and if it was in their interests, recognize that the ROC had some nominal authority or other over Eastern Turkestan, then they would do it because their interests were being served. Their interests were served in having a weak Republic of China so that they could do in whatever territory that republic claimed what they wanted to do as imperial powers, as colonial powers. That was the reality. But once again, just to get us back into the main line of the argument, the notion that the Republic of China was a continuation of the Great Qing state, or that it somehow inherited sovereignty from it, over the Han homeland or over any of the other areas in Inner Asia, is simply false. It's a misrepresentation. So let me just recap to get to the last point. And this is, I don't want you to look at this map in terms of the information zone. I just took it from the internet, but it was the only one I could find before, until we create a better map that shows the distinction between the areas that the Republic of China actually controlled, which is the dark yellow, and all the other areas that before had been part of the Qing Empire in one way or another, or where they had some relationship, strong relationship with authority. And so you can see that more than half of that area was simply not the Republic of China. So what do we know so far? One, that the notion that Eastern Turkestan was part of China or of a Han state since ancient times is false. Two, that there was no continuous Han state all through history, as is being claimed by the PRC, leading up to the Republic of China. That the Qing Empire was not a Han state, that there was no Han state in the 2.5 centuries leading up to the foundation of the Republic of China. Again, no continuity. The Qing Empire broke up, it dismembered, and the Republic of China was simply one of several states that was in the process of emerging from it, emerged from it, and that contrary to what is commonly assumed, the Republic of China did not simply take over and continue to rule the same territory as if it was a regime change. Considering all of this, the question is obvious, and I challenge you to this question: how is China not foreign in Eastern Turkestan when you follow this reasoning? How was China in 1912, when it was created, not foreign? Of course it is, and of course it was. So why is it not clear to everyone? First, because the Republic of China and the People's Republic of China have rewritten history. Secondly, for decades, until recently, and it still happens, scholars and others use the word China and Chinese irrespective of the true meanings of those words, and that creates a confusion, partly intentional, partly non-intentional, which makes it very difficult for us to understand these 6 points or to see them. Third, we are conditioned to think from the perspective of independent states today. And so, of course, the seizure of an independent state by its neighbor, like Russia seizing the Ukraine, it's very clear to us that this is aggression, that this is foreign, that Russia is a foreign state. But because Eastern Turkestan was not an independent state recognized by all other states in 1911, that creates confusion in our minds. But it doesn't make the those that seized power at the time in 1911, 1912, less foreign for that reason. Nor does the fact that those were colonial times make it less foreign. Also, the fact that Eastern Turkestan was under foreign rule has been hidden because, as I said earlier, many recognized the ROC in the boundaries that it had claimed, which is created. And finally, because China today preempts any thought and discussion on that issue by playing the victim. They were the victims of colonialism and imperialism, and therefore they cannot be imperialist or colonialist or foreign in relation to Eastern Turkestan. This is a non-logical argument. It makes no sense. You can be both. Believe me, it happens all the time. But it puts us on the defensive, and it makes it very difficult to actually enter into a discussion on that. So let me come to the present now. As you know, the government of the Republic of China, the original government was replaced by a Kuomintang government, then that was replaced by a Chinese Communist Party government, all by the use of, partly by the use of force, or at least civil wars and so the question is, can China today still be considered foreign? After, since 1912, having some type of nominal authority, and since 1949, actually having control over Eastern Turkestan. And has anything changed since 1912? And the answer to both these questions is yes. In other words, can China still be considered foreign power in relation to Eastern Turkestan, and therefore the colonialism being colonialism of a foreign power over Eastern Turkestan? Yes, because time alone does not change the fact of foreigners. Just think of the 250 years or more of colonial Portuguese colonialism in East Timor or in Angola, etc. Those hundreds of years haven't made the Portuguese less foreign, didn't give the colonized people any less right to be decolonized. So time doesn't change that quality of being foreign. What has changed, though, and that's why the second question is also a yes, there has been a change, and that is that since the Second World War, and in particular 1960s, 70s, and now I quote, alien subjugation, domination, and exploitation has become prohibited under international law, and the remedy for colonialism of this type under international law is decolonization. It is the only remedy that is allowed. Decolonization through an exercise of self-determination in which the people that have been colonized have the choice as to what political status they wish, whether it is independent statehood, autonomy, integration with another state. Theirs is the choice. And so this is why it is important to understand that there is a distinction between simply colonial style of rule and understanding that East Turkestan is actually a colony in the formal sense, that it is a colony established by force by a foreign power. Thank you. So I'm sorry I took so long, I didn't intend to.
Thank you, Michael, for undertaking such a painstaking work over the years, and enlighten not only the audience here at the same time, all the listeners around the world. I would like to just make it simple for some of the audience and others to understand better. So foreign power is the one who is colonizing the East Turkestan, which is People's Republic of China. So victim is the people of East Turkestan, Uyghurs. And there is a legal remedy for decolonization. It is a decolonization, or a process for the people who are being colonized to declare their own legal status or political determination. And also, in my understanding from the study, and by the way, this is the first ever legal study on the legal status of East Turkestan right now, and so more to come. So colonization is a direct result of continuous form of occupation, of foreign power, including a subjugation of people on the land, and conquering the land that belongs to native people, and exploiting the natural resources, and enforcing the foreign culture, including the foreign language and the foreign values and all others, through enforced settlement of foreign people to the occupied land, and the enforced displacement of original owner of the land through all sorts of atrocity crimes, including genocide, whole or part of extermination, and all forms of torture, rape, and looting the natural resources and all others. And as a result, the natives are criminalized and marginalized, dehumanized, and degraded. And so in that sense, it seems to me that the East Turkestan is the textbook example of today's colonization. And you mentioned about the legal remedy. And if you can expand it a little bit more, and from the UN level, what kind of legal remedy available for the people of East Turkestan to end this brutal form of colonization and to decide their own political future?
Thank you. Thank you for the clear description. Of the things you summed up are fairly usual, typical characteristics or consequences of colonialism as we experienced them in the past in many parts of the world. Remedy decolonization through self-determination, as we just explained. What are the paths, if you like, to it? That's a difficult question. It is difficult on the one hand because somehow we, the international community, have exempted China and some other countries from the necessity to decolonize in the way that other powers have been made to decolonize, have been forced to decolonize. And so that our mentality, the political mentality of us and our leaders and governments has to change to the realization that we are dealing with colonial situation and that therefore there are consequences to it. There are consequences to the PRC because under international law it has the obligation to decolonize and it has the obligation to enable or at least not prevent the exercise of self-determination by the people of Eastern Turkestan, of East Turkestan. But also there is an obligation among our governments, obligation among the states, the international community, to enable that right to self-determination from being exercised. In other words, our governments cannot sit idly and let the situation remain as it is. So I think it is time to, and I hope that our book will contribute once it is finished, that it can be used as a tool to educate and convince opinion makers and decision makers that the situation is one of colonialism, that it is time to take the consequences of that and address it. But it remains a political process. So there are some legal avenues, clearly, and it would be good to investigate and pursue those because they strengthen your political argument. But ultimately, of course, it has countries have to have the political will to push China to do what it has to do.
Thank you. Just a little more clarification for our audience. Under the leadership of World Uyghur Congress, this is the first ever legal study by an independent expert just to determine the current legal status of East Turkestan. And with this legal study, we laid the foundation. What is the legal status of East Turkestan today? And the second discussion is, what is the remedy, legal remedy? What is the solution? And so the one legal expert in Canada, David Matas, recently completed one legal study, right to statehood. Legal process for East Turkestan to become an independent state. That is the title of the study. And he studied 5 precedents around the world and how those former colonies became independent state by using the available international legal remedies. And especially one point Michael mentioned is extremely important, which is the UN resolution passed on December 14th, 1960, titled UN Resolution on Guaranteeing Independence for Colonized People and Nations. It is 1514. That is the serial number. And so after that resolution, more than 80 countries, former colonies, became independent. And so this is one legal pathway that they're waiting for us to explore more and present more legal options or understanding for our people to exercise their rights. And this is the beginning. For that reason, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Michael, because over the years and the limited resources he has, and he worked with his team to complete the study, and it will be published very soon. And just, I can only one question if there's any from the audience.
Thank you very much. My question is more about your research, and it is, what is the basis of the judgment that the hands of the Han Dynasty and the Tang Dynasty, since the Turkic stills record the Tang Dynasty as Tabgash, it's in the history, and which is currently recognized as a Han state, which, while there are many evidence even in the current Chinese history records showing that the rulers of the Tang Dynasty speaks Turkish, lived in the tents, and were nomadic, has many nomadic heritage and many other evidences showing that they are non-Hans. Plus, there are also periods that the Tang Dynasty was paying tribute to the Uyghur states and conquered by the Tibet Dynasty as well. There were 28 Tang princes were given to the Uyghur and the Turkic dynasties as tribute, and also many Tang princes were given to the Tibet Dynasty as well. What is the theoretical basis of this Han ethnic group or Han state? Well, the simplified Chinese language was launched since 1986 to unify many languages into one, which is Putonghua. If the Chinese character was a basis of this Han's judgment, then the Japanese and the Korean people were also using the Chinese characters throughout the history, well, ethnically distinct from the Han people today. Thank you very much.
It's a very good. It's a very good question. I mean, I could joke about it and just say I'm being generous to the Han, to the Chinese. Your point is very well taken, and there's academic discussion about what actually is Han and where it originates, and I think what this shows more than anything is that you look at this part of Asia, and it is very difficult to actually identify any pure type of of ethnicity or race or culture or etc. So yes, there is some arbitrariness to it, but there are some arguments that can be made that that dynasty from which the word actually derived, Han, had characteristics of a Han state with the structure and the way of governance and some of the basic principles. But you're right, it's open to discussion, and you could put some